Hi everybody. My name is Sajwa. Welcome back to another episode of Cooking Connected. If this is your first time with us, welcome. We're excited to have you here for another episode. Like I said, my name is Sajwa, and joining me today is Jordan and our lovely volunteer Margie. You guys can say hi.
Hello, everyone.
So, both Jordan and I work with Cooking Matters Minnesota, and that's a program that's in collaboration with the University of Minnesota Extension. And then again, we have one of our Cooking Matters volunteers, Margie, with us today. A normal Cooking Matters class is a 6-week nutrition based cooking class, and usually we meet once a week for about 2 hours. In these classes, you'll usually have a nutrition educator and a chef who work together to teach participants about nutrition and how to make a healthy and delicious and affordable meal. Can't leave that out. Today, Jordan will be our nutrition educator and Margie will be our guest chef. Following that similar format, today we're going to be making a chicken Parmesan quinoa casserole. And we'd like to thank the creator of this recipe, Lee, with fitfoodiefinds.com. And I did put that recipe in the description box of this video. You guys can also check the live chat for that recipe if you want to follow along. But before we get started, I do want to just give you guys today's program code for this week's survey. If you guys have a moment, please take that survey for us. It really helps us continue to do this kind of work and improve as we go. And I will put this in the description box and in the live chat as well. So today's program code for this week's episode of Cooking Connected is going to be E100018. Again, that's the program code you're going to want to use if you want to leave us some feedback on today's video. And with that, I'm going to pass it on to Jordan and Margie. Thanks, guys.
Thank you, Sajwa, for that awesome introduction. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Cooking Connected. As Sajwa was saying, we are going to be making a healthy Parmesan quinoa casserole today. So I'm really excited for Margie to walk us through this recipe. So with that, she's going to go ahead and get us started.
All right. Well, thank you, Jordan. Yeah, that's a fun one to say, isn't it? Healthy Parmesan quinoa casserole. Say that 3 times really fast.
Yeah.
But although it might be a mouthful to say, it is pretty easy to make, very healthy and delicious. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're just going to get our casserole pan. And we're going to go ahead and just spray it down. I'm going to use just some light coconut spray and just give it just a light spray on the casserole pan. And then we're going to take our quinoa, and our recipe calls for 1 cup of quinoa and rinsed. So I already went ahead and I rinsed my quinoa. It's important to rinse the quinoa ahead of time just because it has some additional starches in it, and that rinses out. So I went ahead and I've already rinsed mine. So why don't you go ahead and rinse your quinoa and rinse it however you like. I like to use a fine colander, and sometimes I put it in a pan to catch some of the quinoa that falls through because it is a very, very tiny grain.
Yeah.
So I'll go ahead and put this into my casserole pan if you want to start to rinse your quinoa.
Absolutely. And of course, when you're getting started with a new recipe, it's always a good idea to read through your recipe, make sure that you're familiar with it. Sometimes I hate it when there's a little step at the very end that you're like, I was not prepared for that.
Yes.
So always make sure you read through a new recipe. I know when I'll be trying this recipe later, I'll definitely be doing that. And of course, the first thing we always do, we're washing our hands before we get started and setting up our mise en place. So as you can see in the chef's view, Margie's chef's view, she has everything ready to go. Everything is out and ready. She has all of her produce rinsed and all of her any utensils that she needs for the recipes out and ready to go. So she is really ready for this recipe.
Thank you for going over those important steps. I was so excited to get started. I just jumped right into the recipe. So I have taken my rinsed quinoa and I put it in my casserole dish. And as you can see, it doesn't look like there's a whole lot. It's just pretty flat. And when I first made this, I thought, gosh, is this the right size pan? But trust me, it is, because we're going to be adding a lot more onto this layer of quinoa. And so I just kind of smoothed it down, and then I go back to my recipe. And the next thing our recipe calls for is 1 medium green pepper. Now, you could use a green pepper, you could use a red pepper, you could use a yellow or an orange pepper, or a combination of any of them. But for this particular recipe, I just followed the recipe and just used a green pepper. And I did go ahead and diced it up. And so I diced it, and it's ready to go. And the recipe says to just dice your green pepper, and you'll want about a half of a yellow onion. And so I just cut that in half and diced it up. And then you'll want about 1.5 cups of mushrooms. And for the recipe, because the mushrooms cooked down, I did not chop the mushrooms, and I actually added a little bit more mushrooms because I just love them. So what I'm showing in my measuring cup here is actually about 3 cups, and that's the entire packet that came, but you can go smaller on that. So go ahead and start to chop your onion and your pepper and get your mushrooms ready. And I will do that, and I'll hand it over to Jordan for any commentary that she might have.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Margie. And perhaps if we have a little bit of extra time, you wouldn't mind showing us how you cut your bell peppers. I know I've been teaching classes lately, a lot of different techniques for cutting a bell pepper. So we would love to see that later on. So today we're going to have a little bit of nutrition education while Margie's throwing her Parmesan casserole together. We're going to talk a little bit about protein. So protein's a really important part of our diet. It's found throughout our body, and it's involved in a lot of different processes. I kind of like to think of it as a building block for our body. So it's found in our muscles, our bones, our skin, even our hair. So it's really important that we get protein in our diets. So the recommended amount of protein varies from person to person, depending on their weight and their activity level. So if you are more sedentary, you would need less protein. But the average sedentary adult needs about 0.8 grams for every kilogram of body weight. So you might have to do a little math to figure out exactly how much protein you need, but it's about 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. So for example, someone who weighs about 165 pounds would need about 60 grams of protein in their diet. So protein can come from either animal sources or plant sources. So when we're thinking plant sources, think soy, nuts, seeds, beans, lentils, things like that. Those are plant proteins. Then we also, of course, have our animal proteins. So that's exactly what you are all thinking. Our turkey and chicken and beef and things like that. Those are animal sources. In addition to that, fish, eggs, low-fat dairy also provide protein. When we're thinking about some healthier sources of protein, we always think about lean proteins. So our chicken and turkey are great examples of that. But today we have both in our recipe. Today we have both animal and plant proteins, which is kind of fun. So our chicken, of course, is our animal protein, but then we also have this awesome seed, which is called quinoa. So quinoa is actually a seed. It's classified as a grain, a whole grain, but it is technically a seed. They come in a whole bunch of different colors, black, yellow, red, and even white. And I believe, Margie, what color of quinoa are you using today?
I just use the white quinoa today.
Quinoa.
Yes.
Do you have a preference of type, do you have a preference, or is it just whatever is available?
Yeah, I tend to use whatever's available. I think taste-wise, I think they all taste similar. The red is very pretty, and so if you're wanting to use something that's going to give you some more color, red is great. But I think that the flavor is, for me anyhow, very similar with the different kinds. But today I just use the white, primarily because we're adding marinara sauce, which will be red, and so the quinoa will take on that color and some of that flavor as well.
Sure, absolutely. So there's a whole bunch of different colors you can pick. They even sell them in blends as well. So quinoa is a
the
really
tricolor
great protein. Yeah, the tricolor quinoa that you can pick up in stores as well. So I believe, Margie, are you all finished with putting?
I am. So I just went ahead and I layered my onions and my peppers and my mushrooms on top of the quinoa, and I just kind of spread it out there. And that step is ready. And I can go ahead now. Do you want me to go ahead and show you how I cut a bell pepper?
That would be great.
All right. Now, this is just my method. This seems to be what works best for me. But I always start with, I take off the top. Hopefully make sure there's the view there. And then what I have found is that, so that I want to take out this part of the pepper. I don't use this part of the pepper. And so the easiest way that I have found is I just start to slice around. And I just kind of let it fall off.
Absolutely.
And I just cut off the bottom. And then now this is the part that I feel like now I haven't got a lot of waste. That's the seed, and that's the part that I'm not going to use.
Yeah.
I actually use as much of the pepper as I can. And so I have found it easiest after I've washed my produce. I just pop off that stem and I discard that. And then I cut up this part as well. And so now I've got my pepper just in different sizes. And then I'll just start to just cut them into strips. And my dog loves it when I cut peppers because like I just did, I dropped one on the floor and she's right there to say, hey, Mom, I'd love to have some of that pepper.
Yeah.
So I just cut them into strips. And then from the strips, I just take it, make them in a nice line, use my claw hand and
as you've seen in previous Cooking Connected, I cut my bell pepper completely different. So maybe this technique will work better for you when you're cutting your bell pepper for your casserole. Give it a try both ways. I like to cut the top and bottom off of my pepper and then I kind of unwrap it. But Margie's way seems a lot easier. So I think I'm going to give that a try next time.
Well, and it just kind of came about, cutting up a lot of peppers. And I just thought this seems to be an easy way. And we're very much about trying not to waste any food because there's so much food waste. And so when I'm done cutting it up and I only have this much that I put into my compost, I feel pretty good about it, that I'm not wasting a lot of the pepper. So, but there is no wrong way. Jordan's way is great as well. This is just what works best for me.
Absolutely. And of course, you can experiment with chopping up vegetables. That's kind of the fun part of cooking. You can kind of experiment a little bit. And as Margie was saying, there is a lot of food waste. So she's composting, which is awesome. If you're able to do that, composting is great. And of course, those peppers are expensive sometimes, especially those red and yellow and orange tend to be a little more expensive.
Yes.
So as much as we can use of that pepper, go for it and use as much as you can. And I believe I was speaking with Margie a little bit about what she had made prior to this. She's going to show us what it looks like, of course, when it's all done. She had added a few extra vegetables as well to this recipe. So kind of sneaking more vegetables in. Which vegetables did you add?
I put in some baby spinach, which is just so easy to cook with because it's already washed and I didn't have to chop it. So I just sprinkled a little bit of that on top of the vegetables. And then I also had some leftover roasted red bell peppers that were in a jar in the refrigerator. And I thought that would go really well in there too. I thought broccoli would go good too, or kale. I didn't have any broccoli and I didn't do the kale because I did the spinach instead. So I'm always about trying to add additional vegetables. Zucchini would be great in here and yellow squash. Really, I think there's really no wrong answer when it comes to adding vegetables. The right answer is add the vegetables.
I like that. Yep, absolutely. So this recipe seems like one of those ones that if you have vegetables that are extra in your fridge, you can really throw them in there with the vegetables that you had bought for this recipe. So that's really nice.
Excuse me,
Yeah.
ladies. I have a question from one of our viewers here. So if we are adding different vegetables, does that mean the cook time is going to change at all?
I would say not necessarily because it depends. I guess it depends on the density of the vegetable. Like spinach cooks pretty quickly. You might want to add a little bit more cook time if you've got, a thicker vegetable. I'm thinking like cauliflower or maybe raw broccoli. But if you're using something and you're dicing it up and it's, about the same size, it shouldn't have to take a whole lot longer to cook. And this recipe actually takes about 60 minutes to cook. So it's got a nice long cook time. So those vegetables will just be able to just simmer in the broth of the chicken broth and the marinara and just get a really nice flavor. It's a great question.
So what's our next step on the casserole, Margie?
So our next step is to then flip your recipe over. So then I'm going to set this aside, and then I'm going to take a couple of bowls, and I'm going to mix together in my first bowl. I have my 2 tablespoons of flour, and then I have a cup of Parmesan cheese, and I'm just going to go ahead and mix these into this bowl. And then I'm going to take a teaspoon of minced garlic, and I just use this jarred minced garlic. It's just easy to use. I don't have to chop it up myself. Some people really like to use and chop their own garlic and use a garlic press. That's great, but for me, this works great. I'm just going to put my my hearty teaspoon of garlic in here, and the recipe doesn't call for it, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of oregano. One thing that I can tell you about oregano and different herbs is that they are powerful antioxidants. And we know that vegetables are antioxidants, but herbs also really provide nutritional value. And I think a lot of people don't think about that they're just spices and they add flavor. But so in addition to flavor, oregano will also add some powerful antioxidants. So I'm going to add a generous teaspoon of oregano to my recipe.
And Margie is really demonstrating here how recipes are really guidelines. So she's, adjusting the recipe to her tastes, adding a generous amount of garlic. We are garlic lovers here at Cooking Connected. And of course, adding different seasonings. So I'm sure you can add other seasonings as well to this mixture. I would probably add an Italian seasoning because that's one of my favorites, some garlic powder, onion powder. All seem like great options here.
Absolutely. So this mixture is just kind of stirred up, and I'm going to set that aside. And then in my other bowl, and I like to use just these shallow bowls. These are actually pasta bowls, but when I make a chicken Parmesan or an eggplant Parmesan, these are nice for dredging so that I can get the chicken really covered in the egg, and then I can dredge the Parmesan mixture over it. So I like to use a shallow bowl. Yeah. So then in my second bowl, I am going to crack my egg, and I am going to then just whisk it up, just kind of beat it, which is not exactly easy to do in this very shallow bowl, but it works. Now, my recipe, when I printed it off, I missed step number 4. And so I just remembered what step number 4 was. And that is that I need to put my marinara and my chicken broth on top of my vegetable mixture. So I'm going to first put my chicken breast just on top of the egg mixture. let it soak in a little bit while I add the liquid to that. So Jordan, if you have anything you want to add while I get the chicken breast out of the refrigerator,
Absolutely.
it's all yours.
Yeah, so as you can see, Margie is keeping all of her chicken in her refrigerator for as long as possible. So that is a really great practice. Of course, we've talked about this quite a bit, something called cross-contamination. We want to keep our vegetables separate from our chicken, especially if we're not cooking our vegetables. So for instance, if we were preparing a salad along with this, Margie would want to keep the salad separate from the chicken because we're not cooking that salad, of course. So we wouldn't want any type of chicken juice on there. So she's keeping that in the fridge for as long as possible. Of course, today we are going to be cooking those two together. So there's a little bit less risk involved with that, but it is always good practice to make sure that you keep your dairy and produce, or excuse me, dairy and chicken and proteins like that in the fridge for as long as possible, just to keep it safe for food safety purposes. So I believe she's going to be dredging her chicken, and we will, of course, be putting marinara on the top. So this, yeah, so the next is dredging that chicken, which adds a lot of flavor. I love to dredge chicken. Also, we had talked a little bit about using quinoa. So, you know, when we're cooking quinoa, Margie had already kind of alluded to this a little bit, but we need to rinse off our quinoa. A lot of different packages suggest that we rinse our quinoa to remove those extra starches that Margie was talking about. So when we're doing that, we need to make sure that we rinse it off. Of course, using like a fine mesh strainer or colander. There are very small seeds, so it's really important that it's fine meshed to rinse that off. Next, we can go ahead we use 2 parts liquid for every 1 part of dry quinoa. And that's kind of just a rule of thumb that you can use. A lot of times you can look on the back of your package and it will tell you how you can prepare it as well. So that's kind of nice to have that on the back. But usually 2 parts liquid to 1 part quinoa. And for every 1 cup of dry quinoa, it should yield about 3 cooked cups of quinoa. So it's quite a bit actually for just that 1 cup. You can prepare your quinoa in water or stock if you wanted to, like a chicken stock, add a little bit more flavor. You can also add different herbs and spices in while you're boiling your quinoa to add a little bit more flavor. So that would be something else you can do. So when you are cooking your quinoa, you would go ahead and add the quinoa, the liquid, your desired herbs and spices into a pot, and then you just set that to boil. As soon as you have a rolling boil, you reduce the heat and let that simmer for a little while, about 15 minutes or until it's tender. Then you should be about ready. So you may notice that when you are cooking your quinoa, this little white tail will kind of come off, and that's actually part of the germ of your quinoa. So that has a lot of nutritional value. So you can go ahead and eat that. But quinoa can be used in a lot of different recipes. So we can use it as cereal in the morning. You can cook it with milk or water, and then you can stir in like fruits and cinnamon. So it can be kind of a sweeter. You can add nuts as well, or you can have it as a replacement for rice. You can add it in soups, or you can make a casserole out of it. So very versatile, whole grain and complete protein.
The thing I love about quinoa is it can be served hot or cold. So in this casserole we're making, it's warm. But I'm also making for an Easter picnic, I'm going to make a cold quinoa salad and just add a lot of vegetables. And so it is very, very versatile. So one of my favorite grains to cook with, you know. So the step that I forgot was we need to add 1 cup of our chicken broth over the vegetable quinoa mixture. And then we need to have 3 cups of marinara sauce. And so this is actually 24 ounces, which is 3 cups. So I'm just gonna shake it up, and I'm just going to use this entire jar. Pretty proud of myself at opening it all by myself.
Yeah. When you are looking for a marinara in the store, make sure you're looking for some low sodium options. Marinara tends to have a lot of sodium in it. But sometimes if you have low sodium options, they add sugar to add more flavor. So always make sure that you're looking at those two things when you're looking at marinara in the store. So just turn that jar around, look at the label, and see how much sugar and sodium are in there. Yep. So you can see in the chef's view that nutritional facts label. So they do tend to be pretty high in sodiums, but we have a lot of vegetables in here today. We've got a beautiful grain that we're using. So we're going to use this awesome marinara sauce as well.
That's awesome. So now that we have the marinara and the chicken broth in there, then we can just kind of mix it up a little bit and get them all mixed up. And so now with the quinoa, now we have that, we've got the 3 cups of marinara and then another cup of chicken broth. And so that's going to give us a nice amount of liquid for the quinoa to cook in. And again, I'm just going to give it a little sprinkle with just a little bit more oregano. So that I'm going to set aside, and I put my chicken back in the refrigerator. It's in the egg right now. Get a clean fork for dredging. Okay, so now you can see, and the chicken breast that I got was huge. It was just, the recipe calls for 1, and it was huge. So I just went ahead and I cut it in half. And so the way that I dredge it is that I just have it sitting in the egg on one side, and then I just flip it and get egg on the other side. And then I will flip it again and just make sure that it's just really coated in the egg, because it's the egg that's going to hold the Parmesan mixture on here. So, and you'll find that you won't use the entire egg, and that's okay. It's just, this is what you're using just to kind of to coat it. So then I'll take this, and what I usually do is just flatten out the Parmesan mixture, and then I'll just put one on and just kind of dredge it, just kind of get it all nice and full of this beautiful cheese and
all that.
Oh, doesn't that look delicious?
Absolutely. And of course, there are different techniques for dredging as well. So
Yes.
when we're dredging, so for instance, when I'm dredging like my fish, I do a fish fry pretty often. I'll actually dredge it in flour first, then egg, then like a cookie, or not cookie, but a cracker crust. So there's a few different options. This is just one way
crust
to
would be
dredge.
good.
Yeah, a little bit sweeter there.
Yes. Yeah. So then I'm just going to take that one chicken breast, and I'm just going to set it right on the top of my casserole there. Just change the view there. So there's one of them. And then I will do that with the other. Yeah, this is the first recipe that I've followed where the dredging is not the 3-step. You know, it's where you mix the flour right in there with the Parmesan cheese.
Yeah.
And it seems to really work. And, you know, I think whenever we can make healthy cooking simple, then go for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Less dishes too. So
yes. Yeah.
Always a fan of that. And of course, we have made the video before. Cooking Matters has a baked flake chicken where we do actually use the 3-step dredging process. So if you want to see how that's done, go ahead and check out our video on the baked flake chicken. And we'll show you how to dredge chicken with the 3-step process. But you can do it 2-step and save yourself a little time and some dishes too.
All right, and I'm putting the other one on there. And then I'm just going to sprinkle the rest of that right on top of my chicken. And there it is. Then our recipe says that we need some salt and pepper to taste. And so I'm just going to take my crushed black pepper and just kind of just do a little sprinkle of crushed black pepper and a little bit of salt. And this is Himalayan sea salt. You can use whatever kind of salt you like. This is just all I had. So just a little bit of salt. You won't need a lot of salt because there's salt in the Parmesan cheese. So you don't need a lot of salt. And then just to make it pretty, I'm just going to add just another little shake of that old oregano. I don't know if you can tell, but I have a thing for oregano.
Yeah, we all have our favorite seasoning.
That's right. And then we just need to cover it and cook it at 375 for 40 minutes.
Yeah. So of course, I always like to remind our participants, when you are covering up your casserole dish and you're finally done and you're pulling it out of the oven, make sure that you open it away from you. That steam will come rushing out. You don't want to get burned. I've done that so many times. Every time I forget, it seems like. So
I try to make a little tent with my aluminum foil when I'm using anything with cheese so that I don't get the cheese stuck all over it. I don't know that it always works, but it just sometimes kind of helps to just keep it so that it doesn't get stuck on the top, because there's nothing worse than ooey gooey delicious cheese stuck to the top of the aluminum foil and then you can't eat it.
absolutely.
So, all right, so it's going to go in the oven for 40 minutes.
Another
I
tip for that.
Preheated my oven, so we're good to go.
Awesome. Yeah. And of course, another tip for your tin foil is, of course, you can spray the top as well with cooking spray. You can also use the tent, as Margie was saying, to make sure that cheese doesn't stick to the top. So I believe Margie is going to show us the finished product as well.
I am. I'm so excited for this. Now, the last step on here is the last 20 minutes, then you take the foil off and you cook it without the foil so that you can get that nice kind of bubbly cheese look on there. So doesn't that look delicious?
Absolutely. Yep. That looks amazing.
My husband is going to be so excited for dinner tonight.
Yeah. This was an amazing recipe. Thank you so much for showing us how to do that.
Oh, absolutely. It was a lot of fun.
All right, ladies. Yes, thank you again, Margie, for coming in and doing a wonderful demonstration of that recipe. You guys, please check out the description box so you guys can try that recipe yourselves, share your pictures and comments and feedback. We really appreciate that kind of interaction. And with that, I am gonna go ahead and show our survey code for this week again. If you have some extra time, please take a moment to take our survey for us and help us continue to do this kind of work. So the program code is going to be E100018. And that's what we have for today's episode of Cooking Connected. We just want to say thank you to everybody for joining us today, and we'll see you next week. Bye, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.